Imagine 13th century Italy. It was a land of intense contrasts. On one hand, the burgeoning artistic and religious splendor. On the other, a country torn apart by internal wars and political rivalries. Small towns like Montepulciano in Tuscany lived under the shadow of these conflicts. Feudal lords fought over territories, while common folk faced poverty, disease, and uncertainty. In this turbulent setting, amid hills covered with vineyards and the sweet scent of freshly harvested wheat, a girl was born who would change the course of many lives. We are in Graciano, a humble village near Montepulciano. Its cobblestone streets, lit only by starlight, hide tales of suffering and faith. It was here, in the midst of such simplicity, that an extraordinary child came into the world. From the very first moment, there was something about her, something different, almost indescribable. Agnes Segni, as she was called, was no ordinary girl. The Segni family was wealthy and respected, accustomed to a comfortable life. They wanted the best for their daughter, like any parents would, but their plans didn't align with the destiny that God seemed to have in store for her. From a very young age, Agnes showed signs that her life would take an extraordinary path. At just 4 years old, she could already recite the Our Father and Hail Mary like a little mystic, her hands clasped in prayer and her eyes shining as if speaking directly to heaven. It was at the age of 6 that things truly began to change. While other children dreamed of toys and games, Agnes said something that left her parents shocked. She wanted to become a nun. It was unusual, almost unbelievable. They tried to dissuade her. "You're too young, Agnes. You don't know what you're saying," they told her, assuming it was just a passing phase. But Agnes was resolute. Each time she was told no, her determination seemed to grow. The world around her, however, was unrelenting. In Montepulciano, as in so many other towns of the time, evil had many faces. Corruption, inequality, and injustice filled the streets with sad stories. Near the area, there was even a notorious brothel, a symbol of the degradation that many souls endured. Yet Agnes's pure heart seemed unfazed by the darkness around her. From a young age, she saw beyond it. At just 9 years old, Agnes experienced something that would mark her childhood forever. On an ordinary afternoon, while walking through the fields, she was attacked by a flock of ravens. They came out of nowhere, tearing through the sky with their terrifying cries, pecking at her head and clawing her with sharp talons. Alone and defenseless, she called out to Jesus, begging for protection. When she returned home, bloodied and trembling, her parents were distraught. They believed it might be a sign, perhaps a divine warning. It was then, despite their initial reluctance, that they allowed her to go to the convent of the Dominican nuns. At the convent, young Agnes seemed to have found her place. There she could dedicate her life to prayer, study, and charity. But even in a peaceful environment, her life was far from tranquil. From an early age, she was tormented by malevolent spiritual forces. The ravens that attacked her were only the beginning. It's said that during her prayers, she often faced frightening visions and intense spiritual battles. Yet the more she was attacked, the stronger her faith grew. At the age of 15, something remarkable happened. Agnes was elected prioress of the convent, an extraordinary achievement for someone so young. Her fellow sisters saw in her a wisdom far beyond her years, a maturity that could only be explained as divine. As a leader, she not only guided her sisters spiritually, but cared for them with a maternal love. She would often say, "My daughters, love one another, for charity is the mark of God's children." Each word she spoke was like a seed planted in their hearts. Amid her prayers and daily work, Agnes's life was marked by inexplicable phenomena. In moments of ecstasy, she often entered a profound state of connection with God. It is said that where she knelt to pray, roses and fragrant lilies would bloom, as if nature itself responded to her holiness. On some occasions, the nuns reported seeing her levitate, as though her soul could no longer be contained on earth. But perhaps one of the most remarkable parts of her story was her work with the women at the brothel. That place, so close to the convent, seemed like a constant reminder of the presence of evil, and Agnes could not turn a blind eye. She began visiting the women who lived there, facing criticism and suspicious looks. "What is a nun doing in a place like that?" people would ask. But Agnes knew her mission was greater than the judgments of others. She spoke to the women, listened to their pain, and shared with them the message of God's mercy. At first, many resisted. "How could God forgive us?" they asked, trapped in their own guilt. But Agnes's patience and love began to transform hearts. Slowly, the women started leaving prostitution behind. Inspired by her message, they decided to change their lives. What had once been a place of suffering and degradation became a convent, a space for prayer and sisterhood. It was the fulfillment of Agnes's prophecy. Here, there will be a sanctuary dedicated to God. Years went by, and Agnes continued her journey of faith and sacrifice, but time and challenges took their toll. She fell gravely ill, and her fragile health began to decline. Even so, she never lost her spiritual strength. On her deathbed, surrounded by her sisters, she left a simple but powerful message: love one another. On April 20th, 1317, at the age of 43, Agnes passed into eternity. Her death, however, was not the end of her story. When her body was exhumed years later, something extraordinary was discovered. It was incorrupt, intact, as if time had not touched it. Today, her body rests in the Dominican church in Orvieto, drawing thousands of pilgrims who seek her intercession. The life of Saint Agnes of Montepulciano is filled with fascinating details that highlight her sanctity and make her story even more inspiring. Here are a few. From a very young age, Agnes displayed such extraordinary behavior that many believed she had been marked by God for a great mission. It was said that even her presence brought peace and serenity to those around her. As a child, while playing, she would often pause and gaze silently at the sky. One day her mother asked what she was doing, and Agnes replied, "I'm thinking about what Jesus wants from me." The visions and mystical phenomena Agnes experienced were constant. One of the most famous occurred when she saw the Virgin Mary holding the Christ child, who gave her a pearl necklace as a symbol of her purity. Even in her youth, the sisters in the convent noticed that her prayers were so deep, it seemed as though she were in another dimension. Many times after finishing her prayers, she would emanate an unexplainable fragrance, like that of fresh flowers. She possessed the gift of prophecy and foretold important events in the lives of those around her. According to accounts, these prophecies always came true, deepening the faith of everyone who knew her. When she began visiting the brothel, something curious caught people's attention. The women, even though they initially didn't want to listen to her, felt an inexplicable warmth when near her. They often said that Agnes's presence seemed to light up the room. After her death, the convent she helped transform with the former prostitutes became renowned as an example of spiritual renewal and new beginnings. This place went on to inspire other religious communities of the time. The incorrupt state of her body was considered a great miracle. But there's an interesting detail. Many people say that even today, when visiting her tomb, they can smell the fragrance of lilies, the same flowers that were said to bloom wherever she prayed. Saint Agnes is often depicted holding lilies and a cross, symbols of her purity and her deep connection to the Passion of Christ. Each of these details underscores the greatness of her life, demonstrating that even in a world full of hardship, her faith and dedication were powerful enough to transform lives. The story of Saint Agnes of Montepulciano challenges us to reflect on our own lives and how we perceive the world around us. In a time marked by division, suffering, and darkness, she was a living light, a bridge between the human and the divine. Agnes was not just a girl who stood out for her purity or her extraordinary gifts. She was someone who chose to turn her faith into action, even when it seemed impossible. What moves me most about the life of Saint Agnes is her courage to face darkness head-on. It's not easy to look at the world's darkest places and choose to be an agent of change. Agnes saw the suffering of marginalized women abandoned by society, and recognized in them the dignity that we all share as children of God. It makes me wonder, how often do we avoid looking at others' suffering? How many times do we stay silent in the face of what we know is wrong? Another deeply inspiring aspect is the humility with which she lived her mission. Despite her youth, her mystical gifts, and the admiration she received, Agnes never sought recognition. She understood that her strength came from God, and that made her all the more remarkable. This is a clear lesson for today's world, where we so often let pride or the desire for validation consume us. Agnes's holiness wasn't about withdrawing from the world, but about diving deeply into it to transform it with love. She reminds us that to be holy is not to live in a bubble of perfection, but to roll up our sleeves and work for the good of others, especially those on the margins of society. Perhaps what challenges us most is the unshakable faith she carried, even in the face of spiritual attacks, persecution, and illness. How often, when faced with difficulties, do we feel tempted to give up or doubt? Saint Agnes shows us that when we place our trust in God, we can withstand anything, even the darkest storms. The story of Agnes is a calling to love more deeply, to act with greater courage, and to trust more fully in God. It doesn't matter if our actions seem small or insignificant. As she showed us, one act of true love can transform an entire life, or perhaps even the world. Prayer to Saint Agnes of Montepulciano. Saint Agnes of Montepulciano, faithful servant of God and an example of purity and humility, teach us to love as you loved, with a heart devoted to others and an unshakable faith in the promises of the Lord. Intercede for us, O Saint Agnes, so that we too may have the courage to face the challenges and darkness of this world, bringing light and hope wherever there is pain and despair. Help us to recognize the dignity of every person, even those rejected by society, and to be instruments of divine mercy in our families, our communities, and beyond. May we, like you, live a life of deep prayer, dedication to goodness, and total surrender to the love of Christ. Pray for us, Saint Agnes, that God may strengthen our faith, renew our hope, and guide us always on the path of holiness. Amen. The story of Saint Agnes of Montepulciano shows us that even in the most challenging situations, love and faith can transform lives and bring light to the darkest places. Her courage in confronting darkness, her compassion for those in greatest need, and her dedication to God are lessons that deeply touch the hearts of all who learn about her journey. If you felt inspired by this story, subscribe to the channel Journey of the Saints, Sacred Stories. Share this video with someone who could use a message of hope, and don't forget to leave a like to support our mission of spreading stories of faith and perseverance. Now we want to know, what stood out to you most about the story of Saint Agnes? Was it her courage, her miracles, or her ability to transform lives? Leave your response in the comments. We want to hear from you, and before you go, watch the video above, specially chosen for you. It tells another moving story that will surely inspire your faith even further. May Saint Agnes intercede for us all.